Great, so very warm welcome to Buddhistisches Tour. As always, especially warm welcome if it's your first time here. I hope you had a good meditation next door. Thank you, Tarapalita, for a nice meditation here. Very nice, yeah. So today, in a way, it's a kind of follow-up from last week. Tarapalita gave a kind of talk about the Buddha's first teachings. Yeah, well, that's what it was, yeah. And well, this week I thought we'd have a look at a phrase from the Buddha, a term from the Buddha that had a big effect on me actually in my early 20s, which is the intoxication of youth. Yeah, and actually, thank you, Zimon, for suggesting the title. Oh, well, the subject. Yeah. So this phrase, the intoxication of youth, comes from a sutta, a scripture, which is called delicate or refinement. Yeah, and we'll get into that. Just before that, though, I wrote a little thing in the WhatsApp group about what we were talking about today. And Emily messaged me, yeah, do you mind if I share what you said? Because she sent me a screenshot of this particular bit, which I'll read, and put a circle around it, yeah, and then messaged me. So I wrote at the end, I did not want to end up an 80-year-old man wearing nappies under an Adidas 3-stripe tracksuit from 1996, smoking weed and going to a jungle rave with my walking stick in the year 2058. Emily messaged me and said, actually, being the female version of this at 80 sounds like my ideal, exclamation mark. And I thought that was fair enough. I had to rethink my thing. I didn't want to write a new text, but I thought, you know what, that is pretty good. So, and then she sent another message saying, old age is something to be celebrated, exclamation mark. So maybe that's a point of discussion over lunch or something, yeah? But I like that, I thought it was great. So, yeah, this phrase, the intoxication of youth, had a big effect on me. And I thought we can go through the sutta, yeah, share a few reflections and whatnot. And in a way, you don't need to draw any conclusions. It's more like, as with a lot of the Dharma, you can just let it sink in and just see what happens. There's normally some kind of effect, yeah? So, yeah, in a way, this sutta is kind of the beginning of the Buddha's, the Buddha to be, Siddhartha Gautama, it's talking about the beginning of his journey, in a way, which Tarapalita did touch on last week, yeah? So, the way the Buddha's life story is often communicated is kind of in a mythological form, but it has what you might call an archetypal truth to it that all of us can resonate with, yeah? So I imagine it's probably not historically true. I think it's very unlikely. But what happens in this early part of the Buddha to be's life kind of is true in a way, yeah? So it said that when the Buddha was born, there was some kind of mystic who had some kind of vision and went to the Buddha's father, and the Buddha's father was like the head of the clan, yeah, the republic, maybe you could say he was a king, something like this. And this mystic person said, oh, you've given birth to this son, and he'll either become a great spiritual leader, or he'll become a great leader of your clan, yeah, a king in a way. And so the Buddha's father didn't want him to become some kind of spiritual person at all. So it's said that he basically secluded the Buddha from anything that might make him think outside of his immediate pleasures and enjoyments, yeah? So it's said he didn't see any sickness, old people, death, he didn't see anything like this, yeah? And the story goes that one day the Buddha asked the charioteer, it's almost like the Buddha was kind of not imprisoned, but he was in his castle, in his fortress in a way, yeah? And one day he asked his charioteer, his helper, to take him into town. So he goes into town and he sees somebody with white hair and he's like, what's that? And he asks his charioteer, what's that? Who's that? He's like, he's never seen that. And he said, well, that's an old person. They've got old. And the Buddha to be says, wow, will that happen to me? And he says, yeah, it will happen to you. It happens to everyone. And he's completely, yeah. And then he goes into town, I think probably the next day, and he sees somebody lying on the floor, sick, ill, fever, and he's he's stunned again. He says, "What's this?" And the same response: "Would it happen to me? It happens to everyone." And then a dead person, yeah. And then the fourth sight, he sees what you might call a wanderer, yeah, someone who is looked different, yeah, wasn't running around like a headless chicken, kind of had some sense of peace around them, some sense of something, yeah. And that was the fourth sight which drove the Buddha to be. He wasn't the Buddha yet, out of his palace, you might say, and to look for answers. Yeah? So that's where it begins with the Buddha, yeah. These three sights, and also this fourth sight of someone doing something different. So, yeah, before we get into the sutta itself, I thought I'd start with an experience from my own life, which I found quite amusing, which came up again. So we can take a little time machine and go back to 1991. Yeah, it was a time of acid house, rave. Yeah, and it's kind of, you know, you're starting to get old when things come in retro. You know, it's like you got like kids dressing like you were dressing, listening to music you were listening to, but in a kind of ironic way, and you're like, all right, I'm definitely getting old. So I was 13, yeah, and I was kind of in school, just about, I think. And I had my little crew of friends, and they'd all been kicked out of school, so they weren't in school. And we had a little gang. We used to hang around in the arcades, you know, like fruit machines, computer games, before people really had consoles and all that sort of stuff. And we were kind of like nighttime creatures, you know, those horrible little kids that hang around at night doing bad things. That was us, really, yeah. And we'd also take quite a lot of drugs, yeah. And we started taking acid at one point, yeah. And I think I took quite a lot of acid. We on our first evening, we were trying to sell acid, but we didn't really know how strong it was, so we took one, and then we waited for 10 minutes, and then we took another one, waited for 10 minutes, took another one for 10 minutes, took another one, waited for 10 minutes. I stopped at 4, thinking, maybe, and my friend carried on to 6, and yeah, exactly. It's funny now. It wasn't funny then. And so I remember I had my Jimi Hendrix moment. I was like lying in the park. It was getting dark, like evening time. And I was like, like little schoolboy, I want to eat these for breakfast. It was like the sky was purple and everything was amazing and blissful. And that lasted for, well, it probably lasted for an hour or two, but it felt like half an hour, 10 minutes for me. And then it kind of went into something else, like some hell realm. Because all my friends were like, they were horrible. They were. They were like stealing cars, and they were not the best people to be doing acid with, yeah? So, yeah, we ended up playing It in the park, you know, like running, and there's always like red eyes in the bushes, and then we ended up in a graveyard, yeah? As you do when you're 13. And in some weird mausoleum, and we were just sitting there, and it was super weird. You know, anyway, yeah. And then we started going to sleep, yeah, and I looked at my hands, and I had the hands of like a 100-year-old man, and I was like, it totally spanned me out. And I remember saying to my friend, I've got old man's hands, I've got old man's hands. And he was like, shut up and go back to sleep. And that was it. So that was my little spiritual awakening, being squashed. And it would have been lovely to have some sort of shaman around, or some sort of someone to be kind, you know, and be like, wow, you know. And anyway, there you go. So that was, but I remembered it did have an effect on me. Yeah, it had a very strong effect. That, wow, what's this? Yeah. So let's begin with the sutta. So this sutta is called, can either be called delicate or refinement. Yeah. So it begins, bhikkhus. Bhikkhu is like a monk, yeah? So he's obviously talking to the people around him, his friends. Bhikkhus, I was delicately nurtured, most delicately nurtured, extremely delicately nurtured. At my father's residence, lotus ponds were made just for my enjoyment. In one of them, blue lotuses bloomed. In another, red lotuses. In a third, white lotuses. I used no sandalwood unless it came from Varanasi. And my headdress, jacket, lower garment, and upper garment were made of cloth from Varanasi. By day and by night, a white canopy was held over me, so that cold and heat, dust, grass, and dew would not settle on me. I had 3 mansions, one for the winter, one for the summer, and one for the rainy season. I spent the 4 months of the rains in the rainy season mansion, being entertained by musicians, not one of whom were male. And I did not leave the mansion. While in other people's homes, slaves, workers, and servants are given broken rice together with sour gruel for their meals, in my father's residence they were given wheat, meat, and boiled rice. Amid such splendor and a delicate life, it occurred to me, an uninstructed worldling, we're worldlings, by the way, that's what the Buddha calls us, yeah? An uninstructed worldling, though himself subject to old age, not exempt from old age, feels repelled, humiliated, and disgusted when he sees another who is old, overlooking his own situation. Now, I too am subject to old age, and not exempt from old age. Such being the case, if I were to feel repelled, humiliated, and disgusted when seeing another who is old, that would not be proper for me. When I reflected thus, my intoxication with youth was completely abandoned. So in a way, this sutta just, it sort of leaps right into the heart of Buddhism in a very direct way. Yeah? He's talking about impermanence, not as a theory, but as a fact, as in his own actual existence. Yeah. So it's a very direct teaching and application of what comes to be kind of core Buddhism. Yeah. And I think it's an important attitude to life as well. What struck me when I was reading it, I found interesting, was him saying it would not be proper. Yeah, for me, it says something about dignity. Yeah, I don't want to start slamming, celebrities who've pinned their skin to the back of their head and like think they're 15 when they're actually like 80. But it's kind of undignified, isn't it? So I don't want to I won't say any names. But anyway, so. Yeah, just that struck me. There's something about the Buddha was obviously very sensitive and had the Buddha to be before the Buddha became the Buddha. There was something about dignity, human dignity, where he thought, yeah, if I'm kind of, he used that kind of language, repelled, disgusted. We'll get into that a bit later, but it's kind of strong words. But kind of on an embarrassing note, I remember when I was about 30, I had long hair. And I used to put like kind of oil or grease in it, so it was quite dark, yeah. And I thought, like rock star vibe, yeah. And I noticed at one point that there was one little white hair right in the front, and I was like, that's not good. I got some tweezers and like pulled it out, yeah. And then there came another white hair, and I was like, oh no, that came out, and I started trying to pull all these hairs out, and I just thought, what am I doing? This is a losing battle, yeah. And then they started arriving in my beard. And I was like, all right, it's over. Let's just let this go now, yeah? And it did have an effect. I felt like at that point, these white hairs, which are not going to stop, they need to be worth something. That was my feeling. I thought they need to be worth something. There has to be, archetypally, white hair signifies some kind of wisdom, yeah? Some sort of, experience. And I just thought, it kind of charged me a bit in that direction, I think. Seeing that, and I had the feeling like I didn't want to be the same when I was like 50 as when I was 15. I just thought, especially when you live in like our culture is definitely what you might call a youth culture. It's very difficult for people to know the stages of their lives. It seems, there's many good things, and you don't want to lock people into a tradition where you like, now it's time to do this, now it's time to do that, now you're this age and you have to do this. But at the same time, if you don't have anything, you're kind of like, it's quite easy to end up like a schoolboy when you're 50, it's like, so anyway. So the Buddha goes on, again, it occurred to me, an uninstructed worldling, though himself subject to illness, not exempt from illness, feels repelled, humiliated, and disgusted when he sees another who is ill, overlooking his own situation. Now I too am subject to illness. I am not exempt from illness. Such being the case, if I were to feel repelled, humiliated, and disgusted when seeing another who is ill, that would not be proper for me. When I reflected thus, my intoxication with health was completely abandoned. I like, that word abandoned I found interesting as well as like a sense of clinging, isn't it? You kind of, I've had it loads, I'm sure you have, where you feel super healthy, and then you start getting ill, and there's a kind of, you don't want to accept the fact that you're actually ill. It's like a massive inconvenience on you. Like, you just want to push it away, or rather cling to your health. So I thought it was interesting, this whole business of abandoning intoxication with health. Yeah, it feels like an insult sometimes, doesn't it? It kind of ruins our plans. We've got all these plans, we're going on holiday, we've got this career, whatever we're doing, and all of a sudden you get seriously ill or something. It's like, yeah. But it can be a wake-up call. I think it can be very sobering, can't it? I was thinking, oh God, anyway. Yeah, so I think I was a late bloomer, yeah? So a lot of my friends were having sex when they're like 12 or 13, and I ended up losing my virginity when I was 18, you know, which in my neck of the woods was very late. I was like oversensitive. And so my first, I'm not going to that, but my first sexual experience, definitely not going into that. She ended up becoming my girlfriend, but let's not even go into that. What happened was, well, let's just be straight, yeah. She gave me gonorrhea, yeah. And yeah, exactly. She's like, oh, the beauties of sex, yeah. And I thought, oh, I've strained my hips, like, oh, walking along, yeah. And then other stuff starts happening, which if you've had it, you know what happens, and if you don't want to know. And I went to the doctor, and they do these tests, and if you're a man, you know what I'm talking about, which I won't go into. And then he said, oh yeah, you've got tropical gonorrhea, which means you have to go for an HIV test. And I was just like, what? This is a nightmare. So I was really worried because I knew the kind of guy, I knew who the people was that she got it from. And I was like, oh my God. Yes, I was super paranoid. And I had to wait for a few months to have the test because it wasn't an immediate thing. So it was really weird. I think before that, but I say this because it was interesting, because before going for the test results, I was outside the clinic, and it was really strange. It was just like a thought occurred to me where I thought, if I've got HIV, I'm going to do something good for people. Yeah, that was an actual clear thought for me. Yeah, and I thought, if I don't have it, I'm going to do something good for people. Yeah, which is a really weird. It just happened. Yeah. Anyway, I went into the clinic, and you're sitting there, and I was like super worried, and I thought, oh, a magazine, let's read that. Positive Monthly, Positive Monthly, and it's like, yeah, reduce your virus count by crushing apricot kernels, and I was like, and then like a door opened, this woman came out screaming and crying, and I was like, oh my God. And like went to the door, and as soon as I got over the threshold, the doctor, she said, yeah, you're fine, no white. And I was like, collapsing. And she was like, I thought, these people are skilled. They just get it. She didn't even see my face. I just saw the foot, and it was like neutralized. I was like, oh, thank you. So yeah, that was like a first brush, potential brush with illness, and that had an effect. That had a kind of, I would say, a positive effect on me. On the flip side, I did notice, at that time I was doing a lot of weights, yeah, and fighting stuff, and I was kind of quite strong physically, and I really noted, because I started practicing Buddhism around the same time, yeah, and I noticed an interesting thing, yeah, which was the more strong I was getting physically, and the more capable in terms of let's just say violence. Okay, well that's obvious, but the less compassion I felt, and just remove the boxing stuff and just stay to the weights, because it happened to me again and again throughout my life, that the more strong I was getting physically, I just noticed I just got less compassionate. I hope that's not the same for you. I think maybe it's just a personal thing, but it always struck me. I was just like, it's not the same now, thankfully. Yeah, maybe because I started doing yoga, which is like the one thing I swore I'd never do when I was young. I was like, I'm not be one of those yoga people. Bendy, weak, I don't know what I thought. But yeah, so it did, when I heard that phrase, it was about that time actually, and I thought, oh, that's interesting. I am intoxicated with my own health. Yeah, I could kind of see that. Even though I couldn't control it, I could see it at least. It was like, I still wanted to be big and do weights. But at the same time, I could see that I was less interested in people. I was more like a fortress or something, yeah. Yeah, maybe the last thing I say to do with health was an operation like a few years ago, and it was pretty nasty actually. guts, bowels, blah, blah, blah. And I realized it was interesting. It was like that made me, it was a sense of, the body's not really mine. Yeah, we get this idea of like, oh, this is me, it's my body, that's my leg, yeah, and that's my whatever. Do you know what I mean? And then you're there and you've got like stuff coming out of you and you've got no control over anything and apparently you're going to heal. And I just, that's really interesting. It was like, I really lost, I think that was the key point where I definitely lost Intoxication with Youth, because I'd more or less come to accept having to wear nappies, funnily enough. But I thought, it's all right, I'll just get these massive baggy tracksuit trousers, I'll wear nappies, and if I'm walking around shitting myself, that's how it's going to be, yeah? But that surprised me, how quickly you can adjust to these things, yeah? So, anyway, we'll carry on. Again, this is the Buddha, again it occurred to me, an uninstructed worldling, though himself subject to death, not exempt from death, feels repelled, humiliated, and disgusted when he sees another who has died, overlooking his own situation. Now, I too am subject to death. I am not exempt from death. Such being the case, if I were to feel repelled, humiliated, and disgusted when seeing another who has died, that would not be proper for me. When I reflected thus, my intoxication with life was completely abandoned. Well, that's pretty strong stuff. I don't know if you know, if you're familiar with this Silicon Valley billionaire who's 45 and he's trying to live forever. You know about this guy? Yeah, he looks pretty young. He looks incredibly odd, but he's living on pills. He's getting his face blasted every day. He's doing the right exercise. And he wants to live forever. There's a few people like that, Ray Kurzweil as well, who actually started out making amazing synthesizers, yeah? My dad had one of his synthesizers, yeah? He's like a genius, tech genius, yeah? But he also wants to live forever, so he's just brutally keeping himself on this diet and these pills and exercise regime, because he feels, he feels, because he doesn't know, but he feels that maybe soon enough he'll just reach over the finish line where we've figured out how to live forever. Yeah, and there's something kind of horrifying about that for me. Like, I just thought it's like anti-Dharma or something, you know, it's like anti-Buddha power, you know. And also choosing death as there's a quote from him which is, he said he's making war on death. I was like, good luck with that one. Making war on death. Yeah, that's like probably the worst possible enemy anyone could ever choose. Do you know what I mean? But this guy, you've got to give it to him, you know, he's got his tech company, he's got his billions, he's got his gadgets, he's going for it. So yeah, bad move. Very bad move. Yeah, I don't know. I think I do reflect on death quite a lot. I thought it's interesting the way I reflect on it. I reflect on my own death a lot, and old age especially. But also, I thought, yeah, for me at least, what tends to be at the forefront seems to be to do with cultures and cities and civilizations. You know, like, it really frees me up. You know, you walk along in a place like Berlin or anywhere else, and it's like you can feel a bit locked in. Like, this is life, this is the world, this is reality, and I feel like, this is so temporary. You know, all our kind of music we listen to, fashion, ideas, political opinions, blah blah blah. In 20 years, it'll be something completely different. Yeah, and then it makes me think about myself. About, who will I be in 20 years? You know. Yeah. So, anyway, I'll just say that. But I just find it interesting, this whole business about being repulsed in a way by death and finding it disgusting. He says humiliating. And it's sad to say, I was thinking about like my own granddad, yeah, who I loved very, very much. But for me, it's a point of shame, actually, where I was in my early 20s and he was getting really old, and he was very, very good to me. And I think I just withdrew. I kind of pulled myself away from him somehow. Like, I didn't call him so much, actually, really, if I'm honest. And yeah, I had my own kind of glorious life. I had my glory I was moving to. I was young, and I was like, yeah, you know, I want to be this guy. And this person was kind of not an impediment, but I don't know. Yeah, a reminder of other things that are there, yeah. So, yeah, you can just withdraw from people. You can find death well, he was dying in the end, you know, and it was just like, I just kind of pulled away, and it was messed up, man. It was messed up, but that's what happened. And you have to forgive yourself. I just feel like at that point in my life, I couldn't really do better, but there was definitely yeah. So we do, it happens, you know, we pull away sometimes. And it's fun, well, it's definitely not a funny story, but I was living in this bedsit in London. People know what a bedsit is, if you're not from, no, a bedsit is like, you have your own flat, yeah, you have a large room with a cooker in it and everything, and you share a bathroom and a shower with a load of other people that don't have any money, yeah. And there was this guy there who was probably in his mid-70s with his wife who was an alcoholic, and every time he used the toilet, he'd just smear his shit everywhere, yeah? They'd just be like, you come in the morning like, oh, right, that's nice, you know, and have to go onto another floor. And what was it, like one day, I heard this kind of crashing outside the room. It was about 3 a.m, and I had a sense it was him. And again, it's shameful, but I was just like, oh, it'll be all right. Yeah. And I woke up in the morning because there's police outside my room, and I opened the door, and there he was dead on the floor. He'd like crashed through the door and he was dead. And so again, it was like I felt kind of repelled by death and scared, frankly. And so I just kind of pulled off it. So, yeah, anyway. Oh God, I didn't mean to go down this road, man. But yeah, so it's possible, you know, and I think that's what the Buddha's talking about, that it's kind of improper somehow to have that attitude. I don't think I'm the only one, because I've spoken to other people that have the same thing. Thankfully, you know, I'm not a particularly flawed human being, I don't think. Yeah. Yeah, so you've got these 3 things that the Buddha is talking about, yeah? You've got intoxication with youth, intoxication with health, and intoxication with life, yeah? This kind of, and anything that comes near it, which is not that, it's like, yeah, goodbye, I don't want to know about that. You know what I mean? You get into it, you're partying, yeah, and there's some guys like, yeah, like usher this person away from this inner circle of joy and youth and stuff, yeah. It happens. So, I've chopped it down, but the finally he says, as I maintained this attitude, knowing the Dharma without acquisitions, I overcame all intoxication with health, youth, and life, as one who sees renunciation as rest. For me, energy arose, unbinding was clearly seen. Yeah? So in a way, if you're in a Buddhist center, that's probably the key phrase. Yeah? It's not just, oh, we need to see, we're going to get old, we're going to get sick and die. That's not the point of Buddhism, yeah? So the point is, 2 things, the unbinding, yeah? So his unbinding from his grasping and his aversion led to something, and what it led to was what he says, an arising of energy, yeah? So energy arose. So that's the whole point. He kind of seen it clearly, yeah? Looked it straight in the face, and something happened. He didn't fall into an abyss of like depression or whatever, and all this kind of, oh, this is terrible, yeah? And I think that's important. If you look, it's kind of the end result is kind of energy and vision, yeah? If you really look into the nature of things, yeah, like obviously backed up by meditation and having a clear sense of your actions in the world and the effect they have, you create something robust in yourself, yeah? So that when you actually see things like old age, sickness, yeah, and death, it has a liberating effect, yeah. Because for me, frankly, I think that was a large part of what attracted me to Buddhists when I was in my early 20s. I met a lot of dudes that were older than me, a lot older than me, in their 60s, and seemed to have a lot more energy than me, which was humiliating. Yeah, I was like, what is going on here? There's me like, I'm 20, whatever, kind of slumped, and this person, hey, what's going on? Da, 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 da. You know, we all know people like that. So, yeah, so I think that's what comes with it. It's important to remember that, you know, because what he's talking about is craving and aversion. Yeah, he's got an aversion towards something. He's got an aversion towards sickness. He's got an aversion towards old age, an aversion towards death. or a grasping towards those things, a grasping towards youth, a grasping towards health, and a grasping towards immortality, yeah? And he's dropped the lot, and what's happened is energy has arisen, yeah? So I think it's not often, Buddhism's got pretty bad PR in the world, frankly. Yeah, it's all about relaxing and being nice, and it's got quite other religions have their own problems, frankly, yeah? They're tarnished with different brushes, but Buddhism has a horrific PR image, which I always thought it's so sad, It's just like kind of, because what's not mentioned in a way is this whole business of energy. It's not just you lose craving and you lose aversion. What comes in their place is energy and inspiration and insight and love and all these things, these positive qualities that they're quite difficult to get across, obviously, when you don't have the images. That's why, where am I? Here I am. Yeah, for me, I think that's why the Tibetan tradition I found very helpful, because they've kind of articulated images for this, yeah? So one particular figure, a bodhisattva, I won't go into that, that had a strong effect on me and still does, is a bodhisattva called Vajrapani, yeah? And this figure's extraordinary. He's like huge, like fat, powerful, yeah? Blue in color, yeah? He's like stamping on ignorance, I think, yeah? Covered in fire, flames. He's got the face of like, you can only, if you were like, well, he looks like a demon, yeah? But he's got a third eye, so he's not a demon. That's what you need to look out for, apparently. If they've got a third eye, they're not a demon, yeah? But they can be confused with that. So he's just there, and he's got like a thunderbolt in his hand, covered in snakes, skulls, yeah? Dead people's heads. He's like totally, like ecstatic energy, insight, yeah? That kind of communicates what sort of happens when you see through these things, yeah? When you lose this intoxication, you're not just left as a dishcloth sitting there like, oh yeah, I'm okay, yeah? It's all right. That's not it. There's something else that comes through, yeah? And I think it's a very, it's a very, very good to have images for these things, yeah? We don't often, well, unless we're familiar with Tibetan tradition, we don't often think of things like fire, yeah, or this kind of almost demonic energy, but transmuted, yeah? So that's the kind of end result of dropping the intoxication. And, yeah, we'll leave it there. Good.